Hello and welcome to the candidate forum for Minnesota Senate District 33 and House Districts 33A and 33B. I'm Mary Santee. I'm a longtime member of League of Women Voters, and I live outside District 33, and I'll be your moderator tonight. So all the candidates who filed to run for these offices were invited. The League of Women Voters does not support or oppose any candidates or any political parties. We sponsor forums like this just as a public service so people can get to know what your positions are on the issues that will be important in the coming election. So let me introduce the candidates. For Minnesota Senate District 33, there's Nancy McLean. And for Minnesota House 33A, Hannah Valento. And for Minnesota House 33B, Josiah Hill. And for our format tonight, there will be no opening statements. We'll just move right on with questions. We received the questions on our website, and we received dozens of them for the state races, and more than we could use. So a committee of league members went through and picked out the ones most relevant to the issues, and they include all the themes that people raised in their questions. They were budget and finance, public safety, healthcare, elections, climate, and equity. So that will be the opportunity for you to respond and for people to, for the public to see your positions. So we'll just start with questions, and we'll start in the order you're sitting, and thereafter they'll be rotated. I have a grid that will follow along. Our timekeeper, Teresa, here will show warning signs of 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and stop. And at that time, you can finish your sentence. And don't feel that you have to use all of your time. You can just say what you have to say and be done, and then we'll have more time for more questions. So we'll begin right away with the questions, and we'll begin with Nancy McLean. And the first question is, what should be the legislature's role, if any, in determining school curriculum, and what is taught in the classrooms throughout the state?
Well, the legislature does have an important role in this decision-making because we need uniformity across the state. We need to make sure that every district is teaching children the things that they need to go on to college. But there's also a role for districts in this, right? So the legislature sets the broad parameters, and then districts decide their actual curriculum. So there is a very important role there.
Hannah Valento.
I would agree with Nancy. With the legislature, they're creating the broad, they have that broad stroke, right? And, but then we don't want to overstep that broad stroke and make sure that we're still having the school boards have their powers and making sure that they're still involved with what is happening in the day-to-day of their own districts. So we want to make sure there's that uniformity, there's the test taking that needs to happen, and that the school districts also have a say and the school boards have a say in what is happening within their own districts.
Thank you. Josiah Hill.
Yeah, largely this responsibility is clearly defined, and there are many people who play a role in this work. Some of it happens at the federal level, some of it here at the state level, but also at the school board level, the local level. And once the standards are determined, it's up to each school district and its Board of Education to figure out the best way to teach those standards and to move that curriculum forward. And so this is a shared responsibility. To answer your question, yes, there is a role, and it's defined for the work at the legislature.
Thank you. All right. That's the second. There will be three questions on education, and the second question will go first to Nancy McLean again, and then Josiah, and then Hannah. If elected, what will you do to ensure that funding of our public schools adequately keeps up with inflation and growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have not appropriately funded at the state level for education. We need to move back to fully funding education because right now we're experiencing a shortage, and it comes out in levies at the district level, right? So levy after levy after levy to try to make up for the funding that's not happening from the state level. And that might work well when you have a district that is wealthy and can afford to do levies. But when you have districts that don't have that wealth, we get discrepancies. So we need to get back to fully funding education from the state level.
Thank you. Josiah Hill.
Each day over the last 22 years, I've served students. I'm a public educator. I've worked as a high school English teacher during that time frame. And what I can tell you is we have work to do in this realm. I was born during a time that the Minnesota Miracle came out of, in a time when both parties were proud to support our schools and to make sure that our kids have everything they need. And so the legislature does have work to do. We have fallen way behind since Governor Pawlenty cut our budgets, and we need to catch up. We have a unique opportunity with a historic surplus, and we need to work across the aisle to strategically invest in the future of Minnesota and our kids. And so lots of work to do and lots of opportunity to do that work, and we look for partnership in that.
Thank you. Hannah Valento.
I agree with both Nancy and Josiah here. One of my top issues is education, and I love to tell the story that when I went to Forest Lake, I was either a junior or senior, and one of our classes, a class that I attended, we actually didn't have enough desks, and so we had to share desks, and that's extremely problematic. And Forest Lake is an example where a levy needed to be passed, and thankfully it was passed through hard work and effort within the community to get that communication out there and just really invest in our schools. And now I've toured the school, and it's beautiful, and I assume kids aren't sharing desks anymore, but we still need to do a lot of work at the legislature and make sure that doesn't happen again, and that's not happening at any school district.
Thank you. For the third question around education, Hannah Valento will begin. And the question is, what strategies would you recommend the state adopt to reduce the academic gap?
Ooh, that's a good question. I guess my recommendation, and this kind of goes back to your first question, is really funding. I think a lot of schools just, without the funding, you have lack of teachers, you have lack of school bus drivers. Another example from Forest Lake, last year we had a lack of school bus drivers, so students weren't getting to school. And then if parents are out working, how can that student get to school? And then we could see that gap continuously grow if we are over extenuating the teachers. So if we don't have enough teachers, if we don't have enough school bus drivers, and just really making sure that we have counselors in our schools, and just making sure we have that funding there so we can get all of those appropriate people in our schools to make sure our kids are all receiving the education that they deserve.
Thank you. And the question goes next to Josiah Hill.
Yeah, we have an awful lot of work to do. I think we need to first agree that our kids, our children in Minnesota, are our most precious and most important natural resource. And as we move forward, there are many things we can do to begin to look at achievement and to raise achievement. Number one, we need to give every student, regardless of zip code, identity, regardless of income, regardless of background, ethnicity, race, etc., has a world-class opportunity to have a great education. That's step one. Step two, we need to focus on the whole child. We are coming out of a pandemic where our children are still reeling, and in many cases don't have the supports they need outside of school. So we need to make sure that every child has what they need to come to school ready to learn. The last thing is we need to make sure that we offer robust opportunities. Not every child is going down the same educational pathway, but we need to make sure that every child has the opportunity to become who they want to be.
Thank you. And Nancy McLean.
It is stunning in Minnesota, where we have such a great education system, to see that we have such a large achievement gap. It's concerning to me, and I think there are a number of things that can be done about it. One of the things is universal pre-K. That is known to be helpful. So instituting that, affordable health care. If kids aren't well, they can't do well in school. Closing the special ed gap, getting back to funding. We really need to be appropriately funding schools, and that is staff as well. Schools need to have enough paras, enough counselors, enough staff to really be serving children in the way that they need to be served.
Thank you. So we turn next to questions around budget and finance. And the first question will go to Josiah Hill. And the question is, the 2022 legislative session ended with no action on the remaining 7.2 plus billion state surplus. What do you believe the state should do with that surplus?
Very good. Well, we need to seek partnership and work across the aisle and be strategic. There needs to be a balance when it comes to our spending here in Minnesota. If there's anybody out there that doesn't believe that investing in Minnesota's future is a part of that, I would disagree with that, and I'd want to share and receive perspective from that person. As we move forward, there's an opportunity to strategically invest part of that surplus, and there's also room for a conversation about returning some of it to the taxpayers. But as we look ahead, this is a very long game. This is about our current situation, and this is about the next generation and the next 20 generations after that here in Minnesota. And so we have to be strategic, we have to find balance, and we have to find ways to partner with folks that have not been ready to partner recently.
Thank you. And the question goes next to Nancy McLean.
Yes, I was very disappointed in the end of the session because the legislature had worked out an agreement on what to do with that money. And then at the end, our friends on the other side backed away from it. I did support and do support the $1 billion that was dedicated to go to education. That would have really helped our children coming out of this pandemic time. There was also money dedicated to come back to all of us in the form of a rebate. And when people are being so pinched, that would have helped. And another piece of that legislation was to go back to Social Security tax, removing that. They had agreed, it had passed through the House, and then the Senate waited out the clock and went home. That's inexcusable. We need to be working for the people in our districts and getting things done.
Thank you. Hannah Valento.
I support that the deal that was struck the last legislative session as well. I think if we put that money towards our education, towards infrastructure, and just really invested in our community, like what was struck in that deal, I think it could have significantly benefited so many different areas within our communities and the lives of our people here in Minnesota.
Thank you. And for the next question, we'll go first again to Josiah Hill. And the question is, in the next biennium, what do you believe should be Minnesota's spending priorities?
In the next biennium, we have a lot of work to do in funding education. We have massive gaps coming out of the pandemic, and we had deficits before that time with our funding, and so we have some work to do there. Secondly, with infrastructure, we need to make sure that every Minnesotan has access to broadband internet. We have places in Minnesota that simply cannot access high-speed internet. If you want to start a business, if you want to gain an education, trying to do those things without access to broadband is nearly impossible in 2022. And so we have work to do there. We also have roads and bridges that need work, and we need to continue to look at where are we failing in Minnesota. Nancy mentioned the achievement gap earlier. We have some investments that we need to put into that. And so there are many areas, but here's the good news. We have an opportunity to invest now like we have never in Minnesota. And so finding that balance point and seeking partnership to achieve that is what I believe is the trick.
Thank you. And the question goes next to Hannah Valento.
Similar, I think we could really just invest in our communities and put that money towards education where it's where we're failing to meet those needs. Especially, we are one of the worst with the counselors in our schools, so really meeting those needs of our education. But infrastructure, a great example for infrastructure regarding Wi-Fi is that there's parts in my district as well as 33B and just 33 as a whole that literally do not have Wi-Fi or any options at all. And so I know people who they didn't have Wi-Fi at all. And so thinking of those times when kids had to go to school from home and people had to work from home, and that there's still that potential there. I think there's just so many areas that we could improve upon with Wi-Fi, broadband, and especially in the rural communities of our state. And again, our roads need extreme maintenance, especially with the weather that we experience here. But there's so much more that we can use that money for.
Thank you. And Nancy McLean.
Yes, education has to be a top priority. Our communities are only as strong as our education system is. And coming out of the pandemic, it's very clear that we have huge needs. So that would be a top priority. As my colleagues have said, infrastructure is another area of deep concern and needs to be a top priority. It's roads and bridges, maintenance of those, and actually focusing on infrastructure helps our economy. It creates well-paying jobs for folks and grows our economy. So it's a win all the way around. And then we also need to focus on broadband. And we're all really aware in this community of the limitations of the current broadband. I was out delivering lawn signs last week and my GPS didn't work because there was no broadband. So it is an issue that we need to focus on. For small businesses, for families, for everyone, it's essential. Thanks.
Thank you. And the next question will go first to Nancy McLean. What strategies would you recommend to address the impact of inflation on Minnesota citizens?
Yeah, well, I think what we need to be focused on is an economy that works for all of us, not just special interests and corporations. So that is looking at reasonable tax reform, looking at things that reducing costs and helping families, seniors, small businesses. Right now, healthcare is unaffordable for many. I mean, there are many other examples beyond healthcare, but we need to be changing this to work for everyone.
Thank you. The question goes next to Hannah Valento.
Yeah, we, in these times, we desperately need to be looking into how we can help our communities with inflation. Gas, thankfully, it's going down now, but it was to a point where, people may not have been able to go get the groceries or the prescriptions that they needed to get. And then, especially out in this district, we don't have public transportation. And so when prices get so high that our families are struggling, our kids are struggling and feeling those repercussions from that, we need to make sure that we're helping our communities in every way that we can.
Thank you. Josiah Hill.
You bet. And I think this is a question where it'll really put on display the departure from my stance on this question and that of my opponent in 33B. I believe this requires many elements of supporting our citizens in every corner of Minnesota. I mentioned it before, finding that balance point on what to invest when it comes to our surplus and what to return to our citizens, and making sure that every Minnesotan has opportunities, the opportunities that they need to grow and to thrive. My opponent recently spoke about on a talk show his hope to legislate, in his words, onto the people, policy that would cause suffering, that would reduce opportunities for those in need in Minnesota. And I think that we need to make sure that whatever solution we focus on, and we need to focus on it together, includes all Minnesotans, not just those at the top of the pyramid.
Thank you. All right, the next two questions are around the subject of public safety. And the first question will go to Hannah Valento. Many are concerned with increased gun violence in our communities. What legislation, if any, would you support to help reverse this current trend and respond to the need for safer communities?
So, two things for my answer. I think we need to look into passing common sense gun laws, and then also making sure we're actually investing in our police departments. For example, Forest Lake is a city where we were actually lacking the amount of police officers for statistically what a city of that size needs per the population. And so we were actually able to pass a budget where we added 2 new police officers to the department, making sure that there's more safety out there. And I think just making sure that our police officers have the resources that they need, and, you know, even getting mental health experts in there to help them, because again, for Forest Lake, one of the top calls are mental health calls. And we need to acknowledge that, and we need to have experts there to make sure that we're supporting our police officers and just making sure our communities are safe all around.
Thank you. And the question goes next to Nancy McLean.
Yeah, I think we need sensible gun laws. And I say that as someone who comes from a family that has hunters and military folks who have guns. But I think we can all agree that we are at a point now where we need to do something. I think what's reasonable is closing the loopholes, the red flag laws, instituting those. The biggest gun violence we have in this state is suicide. And so red flag laws help protect people from that. Also addressing the ghost guns and Glock switches, which are becoming an increasing threat to our police officers. So all 3 of those things would be helpful in reducing gun violence while not taking away the rights of gun owners.
Thank you. Josiah Hill.
You bet. I have a couple of friends who serve in law enforcement, and I listen deeply to their responses to questions on this topic. Nancy just touched on ghost guns, and we need to find a way to regulate ghost guns. Ghost guns are untraceable mechanisms that are all but guns, lacking just one piece, one spring, something very simple that can be added. And they're untraceable, and they're on our streets. Number 2, something Hannah mentioned, we need more cops. We need more boots on the ground. We see, especially our friends in greater Minnesota, where police departments can't recruit or retain law enforcement officers. And so we need to invest to ensure that they have what they need, the support, the wages and the benefits, and they have communities that can support those things. The last thing I would offer is that we need to work together. Having folks across the aisle who refuse to have a conversation on this important topic is not helping. And so we're working to find ways to pass red flag laws and looking at background checks. These are no-brainers to me.
Thank you. The next question is still around public safety, and Hannah will get the first answer. How will you work to lower crime in Minnesota and improve public safety for all?
So I feel like this is, my answer will be similar to my last answer, but it's also, I think, around educating our community and just really bringing everyone together. And I think another thing is when people can see that the legislature can work together and we can all be civil and work together as a community, I think that trickles down. And when we work together, that shows in our community, and then people will there'll be more of a community, a sense of community instead of being so individualistic. And I think once we get to that point, and I'm really hoping that we can really get there, I think our communities will benefit from that. But then also, again, just making sure that we have enough police officers out there and that they're retaining the police officers needed to be out there and to help our citizens. Because when our police officers, the departments have enough police officers, they have the opportunity to go to community events, to make those introductions to people, and really just have a great communication and a great relationship with the community.
Thank you. Josiah Hill.
There are a lot of layers to this. Number 1, more police officers. Number 2, we have a pandemic in our country of opioid abuse. And we need to make sure that we have offerings and services to help provide for those who have addiction issues. The last one that I would offer is as we move forward, we have to make sure that we hold violent offenders accountable for their actions. And we have a lot of work to do in all three of these areas. But my belief is that these three in tandem will really begin to move the needle on keeping our community safe and free of violence.
Thank you. Nancy McLean.
Yeah, I actually think it's a four-pronged approach. We need to adequately fund our police. We also need to create prevention programs for at-risk youth. We have right now an explosion of 16 and 15-year-olds that are stealing cars and they're out there running around with guns. We need to identify kids that are at risk and be getting them into programs and services early on so we don't end up with this problem. I think we also need to address mental health and substance abuse issues and then sensible gun laws. So there's no one single answer. It's all of these together really get at the solution for this.
Thank you. The next question is around health care, and it goes first to Josiah Hill. Do you support the current Minnesota constitutional right to an abortion? How would you respond to any legislative proposals that concern law and government policies related to abortion?
Well, I'll start off by saying very clearly, I am a pro-choice candidate, and I support a woman's right to choose and make decisions regarding her reproductive health. I'm the father of 3 young daughters. I've taught thousands of students over the years, and I recognize clearly the importance of this right to choose. As we move forward, if there are any pieces of legislation that come forward that speak to reducing that right or limiting that right, I'm going to have a hard time finding a place to agree on that. Our world has been shaken and turned upside down since the Roe decision was overturned in June, overturning 49 plus years of what was then, prior to June, seen as a right. And so as we look ahead, we need to protect our women's rights and find ways to enhance rights, not reduce them.
Thank you. Next, the question goes to Nancy McLean.
Well, I'm a mental health provider. So in my job, I work with trauma. I work every day with people who are survivors of sexual violence, whether they're rape or incest survivors. I also work with people who have been through really traumatic experiences having babies, finding out at that 20-week checkup that something's gone terribly wrong and their baby won't be viable. So to say that we're going to legislate away their right to choose how to handle that situation is absolutely inexcusable to me. Women have a right to make decisions about their own bodies. I will protect that right, absolutely. There is no place for politicians in this decision. It's a decision for a woman to make in concert with her healthcare providers.
Thank you. Hannah Valento.
I am pro-choice, and I believe at the legislature that we need to draft legislation and codify this into our law. And if there's anything, any legislation that comes forward that would limit a woman's right to choose and really meet with her own medical provider and make the best choice that she needs to make, I will strongly oppose those bills.
Thank you. And the next question will go first to Nancy McLean. What is your position on ensuring all Minnesotans have access to affordable health care?
That's a great question. As a healthcare provider, I'm deeply concerned about that. I have been working on healthcare reform for a number of years. I work with Healthcare for All Minnesota and a number of other groups trying to get healthcare reform. As we currently sit, the Republican Senate has not even allowed hearings on plans that would do exactly that, bring affordable health care to all Minnesotans. It's a major reason that I'm running for office. As I've door knocked this district, just 2 weeks ago, I was up in Forest Lake at a door with a young family telling me about a mental health issue with their child that left them with $40,000 of debt, and they were filing bankruptcy. This is the leading cause of bankruptcy, and it doesn't need to be this way. There are reasonable solutions.
Thank you. The question goes next to Hannah Valento.
We desperately need to do something about our healthcare. Even people who, like my mom, for an example, she has a full-time job, but her premium is just ridiculous. I remember one time I was under their insurance, and I was even having my own scare, but my parents were like, it's so expensive to go, and our people shouldn't have to be in those circumstances. We need to be able to go to the doctor if you need to go to the emergency room to get whatever help you need to get without having that scare of what will the bill be, what will the cost be, will I have to file bankruptcy. It's sad that we have our community members in that situation, and we desperately need to change it.
Thank you. Josiah Hill.
Yeah, Minnesotans should never be one mental health crisis, one bump on the head, one free car accident away from years, decades, even generations of financial peril. There's no excuse for it. We have work to do, and we need to do it on behalf of not special interest groups, but every Minnesotan, so that they have access to high-quality health care where they live. As we look ahead, I look back. I think of students I've worked with who didn't have access to quality health care and the challenges that presented for them. If we want to truly do right by our neighbors and our fellow citizens, this is an area where we need to begin that work. We are way past the time where we shouldn't have access for all.
Thank you. And one more question on health, and some of you have referred to this already. It'll go first to Josiah Hill. Should the state invest in more mental health resources? And if so, how should that be done?
Absolutely. I believe that they should. Number one, I see it on display in our schools every single day. The need that our students are exhibiting. The needs are far greater coming out of the pandemic and the uncertainty and the lack of structure that brought forward. And so I think strategically, starting with our youngest folks here in Minnesota is a good place to start. We also need to have services available, and available in every community, not just in our cities or in the metro area, but in every corner of greater Minnesota. So investing to ensure that we have practitioners and service providers in our communities that are not 3 or 4 hours away by car, but are right there in town. And I think the last thing that we need to do is to make sure that we take care of our neighbors and make sure that we invest part of that surplus to ensure that every Minnesotan has an opportunity for economic equilibrium.
Thank you. And the next question goes to Nancy McLean.
Yes, we have a real shortage, a critical level shortage of mental health beds in this state. So when someone is in crisis currently, they often cannot get a bed. They can't get admitted to the hospital. Or if they're admitted, the hospital is so full that they are sometimes released before they should be. Or they're sent hours away to a hospital across the state. That's inexcusable. It doesn't help anyone. It puts that person and our community at risk. So we need to do better on that. We need to be providing services in schools because that's, for some children, that's the only place that they're going to have access. And we come back to affordable health care. The state needs to help us figure out how to bring affordable health care, and there are solutions, to every Minnesotan so people can access the care that they need.
Thank you. Hannah Valento.
Yes, I think we need to make sure that we have mental health resources in our schools. Our children deserve that, and we also need to make sure we have accessibility, as Josiah said, especially in the more rural communities. We need to make sure that people are able to get and seek the mental health that they deserve and that they need, and also with affordability. Because most people would love to go see a mental health therapist or a specialist, but they choose not to because it's not affordable for them, it's not attainable for them. And that's a sad spot that our community members are in. So we need to make sure we have the accessibility, affordability, and then also I think communication. I still think we're on that verge of where there's some in our population that mental health is something that's talked about and something that's okay to talk about, but there's still some people that shy away from that. So I think if we make sure our community members know that it is okay to go seek mental health, and it's a community effort to make sure that our community members are happy, safe, and healthy, then that's the best that we can ask for.
Thank you. And we turn now to questions about elections. And this question will go first to Nancy McLean. As a member of the legislature, what measures, if any, would you support to reinforce or ensure voter confidence that our elections are secure and the results are accurate?
I think we're very fortunate to live in one of the best states for voting. We have the highest voting record, and we have safe elections here. If anything, what I would do is expand on our areas of, accessibility to voting boxes and that sort of thing to make it easier for people. But I believe that we are doing very well. We are one of the safest and, one of the highest voter turnout states.
And next is Josiah Hill.
Well, I'll echo what Nancy said. We live in the state with the greatest turnout, election after election, and I see that as a good thing. I know that there are candidates out there, not many in the party that I represent, that see that as a problem and something to work on and something to reduce is when it comes to the number of voters. I think oftentimes this issue gets pushed out of the mainstream by fraudulent arguments that we have voting machines that are somehow sinister, that are siphoning votes one way or another. I believe in much the same that Nancy does, that expanding access to the polls is the best way to move forward, to give all Minnesotans confidence in our elections. Because when some voices don't feel like they've been heard, that's cause for alarm. We need to make sure that every Minnesotan has an opportunity to have their voice heard when we make decisions about the future of our great state.
Okay, and now we have a little break of lightning round.
Can I answer?
Oh, sorry, Hannah.
No worries.
I'm sorry. Okay.
I'll make it quick, don't worry.
Keep me honest.
I'll make it quick. So to answer the question, I agree with both Nancy and Josiah. I think we need to make sure that there's more accessibility, broaden it more, but I think also just communicating, making sure that people have the resources to go online or to find resources just to, if they question the elections or are even just curious about the elections, to that they're able to go find that information, read up on it, and just learn and have access to voting.
Thank you. Okay, for this lightning round, they're all on elections, and what I'd like is a yes or no only, and no explanation. So I'll do the first one, and we'll go Nancy, Hannah, and Josiah. Do you support or not support the use of absentee ballots?
Yes, support.
Yes, support.
Yes, absolutely support.
And for this one, we'll start with Hannah, Josiah, Nancy. Do you support or not support the use of drop box voting?
Yes, support.
Yes, I support.
Yes, absolutely.
And this one, we'll start with Josiah, Nancy, Hannah. Same-day registration.
Yes, I support it.
Yes.
Yes.
And we'll start Nancy again, Hannah, Josiah. Mail-in ballots.
Yes, I support.
Yes.
Yes, I'm in full support.
Okay, Hannah, Josiah, Nancy. Automatic voter registration at driver's license center, motor voter.
Yes.
Yes, I'm in support.
Yes, absolutely.
And finally, which one did we start? Start with Hannah this time.
Okay.
Hannah,
give me this
Josiah.
I think it's Josiah this time. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
I'll
No,
go
let's
first.
go Josiah,
Great.
Hannah, and Nancy for this last one. Voter ID, support or not?
I'm not in favor of having to show an ID to vote.
No, not in support.
No.
Thank you. Well, that was a little break. But we'll go back to the regular timing with the next question, and it's on climate. And it will start with Josiah Hill. What do you plan to do to support safe air, water, and soil for our community?
Well, this is of the utmost importance to me and to our campaign. I grew up in Stillwater, which is up the hill, is where I grew up, from a great reminder of why we need to keep our eye on the ball when it comes to keeping our state safe and clean. Number one, I think we need to make sure that we have clean air, and I want to continue to work to move to a carbon-free energy economy. This has many benefits, but the work that we're doing to move our grid carbon-free needs to be augmented by focusing on investing and moving our transportation system to a more welcoming environment for electric vehicles. Secondly, we need to make sure that we continue to do the work in the ag sector, in that we need to hold corporations accountable for polluters. Bad actors in pollution from our corporations need to be addressed, and they need to be held accountable.
Thank you. And then next goes to Hannah Valento.
I agree with Josiah, and one point that I want to touch on, since I only get a minute, is watershed districts. I think they're often overlooked, and as a person who, being on city council, I'm the liaison for our watershed district. They have done tremendous work for our waters and our streams in our area, and just the wetlands in our area. For example, I live on 10 acres, and most of my land is wetlands. And so just making sure that our wetlands are in support, because they're the lungs of our lakes, and our district is huge with lakes and waterways. So I would like to see more investment in our watershed districts to make sure that our waters are clean, and that we're getting the specialists out there looking at our waters, making sure that they are clean, that they're thriving, and that they'll be there for future generations to enjoy.
Thank you. Nancy McLean.
Yeah, I think number one, we need to make it easier for people to help us reduce the carbon footprint with electric vehicles, making that easier. I know that in my district, people that live up in Marine on St. Croix have probably an hour trek to a place where they can charge. We've got to fix that. We've got to make it easier for folks. We need to protect our waters, addressing big ag, the CAFAs. That's happening a lot in Wisconsin, which borders our beautiful Stillwater and St. Croix River Valley. We need to protect against those. And, we have a real opportunity to be a clean energy technology leader. There's no reason that can't be Minnesota, and that's a win for jobs, it's a win for our economy, and it's a win for our environment.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is also on climate, and it will begin with Nancy McLean. Do you believe the state has a role to play in reducing carbon emissions to address the changing climate? And if so, what should the state do?
I absolutely believe the state has a role. We're seeing them start to do some things. We need to pick up the pace and do more. The state can help us with things like having charging stations. Currently, they are switching over, and we need to do more of the switching over of our buses and mass transit to electric vehicles. There are a number of different ways like that I think the state can be really helpful in moving us forward at a faster pace.
Thank you. Next, it goes to Hannah Valento.
Yeah, I agree that the state has a role in that, and I would love to see something that Nancy touched on a little bit, just accessibility. I would love to have solar panels on my roof or just in my yard, but I can't afford that. And most people I know most likely can't afford that either. So I just think accessibility, affordability, because we would see so many more people investing in that and being part of that, and just really taking pride and support in creating a more green environment.
Thank Thank you. Josiah Hill.
Yeah, I believe that we can beat our targets to go carbon-free on our electrical grid by as many as 15 years. The promise to do that by 2050 is noble, but we can do better. Secondly, it is now cheaper to produce wind and solar energy than it is to burn coal. And so we need to provide the infrastructure and the programs like Hannah was speaking to allow that technology to be taking place, not just for the big corporate entities, but for individual citizens as well. And so we have opportunities, along with what I mentioned before, ensuring that Minnesota can be a leader with electric transportation. And again, this comes with a massive and beneficial economic impact. These are good jobs, they're high-paying jobs, and we can be a leader here in Minnesota with investment now.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. We'll go first to Hannah Valento, and that is, what does equity mean to you? Where do you feel Minnesota has made progress with regard to equity, and where do you feel progress still needs to be made?
Equity, to me, it means that we are supporting our people in all areas so that that everyone can reach the same area, regardless of what they have and regardless of privilege that people have, but making sure that everyone can have an equal opportunity. And I think areas we're lacking are just so many. The first one that comes to mind is education, of course. I think education is an area that making sure where people have accessibility and we're closing that gap, because then the more people, and healthcare has a lot to do with that too. I think there's so many things that are interconnected in a question like this that there's so many areas in that if we can make sure healthcare is affordable, accessible, and we have education that is affordable or accessible for people, and we make sure that internet is accessible as well. And oh my gosh, I wish I had more than 1 minute, because there's so much that goes into this question. It's a huge question, but there's so much that needs to be done in so many different areas.
Thank you. And the question goes next to Josiah Hill.
Absolutely. To attempt to answer this question in 1 minute is quite a trick. But here's what I would offer. Equity, to me, means providing everybody with the supports, with the resources, and with the conditions they need to have an opportunity to achieve, like the person on their left, their right, in front of them, and behind them. On display where we have deficits in this area, certainly education at K-12. E12, but certainly in higher education. We also have concerns in our healthcare realm. And I'd also say, throughout our workforce, that we need to make sure that every Minnesotan, and I used this language before on an education question, regardless of their zip code, their income, their background, their identity, that they have conditions accessible and in place for them to proceed and achieve their goals. To be like the people around them and have those opportunities too.
Thank you. And finally, Nancy McLean.
Well, I agree that 1 minute is not nearly enough time to talk about this topic, but what I will say is that two areas that immediately come to mind are that vital to closing the achievement gap is equity, and also equity is vital to closing the wealth gap. We have a stunning wealth gap in this state, and providing things like paid family leave and affordable child care and health care can help make the system more equitable for people. My colleagues have already talked about providing students with what they need in school, to close the gap on achievement, but we have many areas where we really need to be looking at equity. Healthcare is another, but there are so many. So I would start with a focus on the achievement gap in education and on the wealth gap, because those are going to make the biggest difference most quickly.
Thank you. I neglected to say what you knew. You had an opportunity from each question to do a rebuttal or add any more information. So this is a question you want to do that, let me know, and you can each have another minute. Otherwise, we'll just go right on.
Quite difficult without knowing the question, so why don't we, I would offer, why don't we move forward?
You want to go on to the next question?
That would be great.
Okay, we'll do that. The next question will go first to Josiah Hill. Would you support increasing the state's investment in early childhood education? Why or why not?
I would be in favor of increasing our investment in early childhood education. The facts and the stats are clear that an investment here will actually save Minnesota money down the road. The facts show that investments in early childhood directly lead to a reduction in incarceration, and they also lead to closing the achievement gap. And I believe these are worthy goals that are shared by most of our citizens here in the great state of Minnesota, both in the metro area and in greater Minnesota. And when we have common goals and we know how to achieve them, to me, that's a worthy investment.
Thank you. And the question goes next to Nancy McLean.
Yes, can you repeat the question, please?
Would you support increasing the state's investment in early childhood education? Why or why not?
Yes, I absolutely would support that, and here's why. I think universal pre-K does a couple of different things. It helps to close the achievement gap. It gives kids who are needing extra help that boost. It gives everyone a good, strong start, but it also contributes to the wealth gap in that kids that are going into preschool are going in earlier and allowing a parent to get back to work, a parent that perhaps couldn't afford childcare. Childcare in our state right now currently is at $375 a week on average for an infant. So if you do a 40-hour work week, that adds up to $12.50, I think, an hour. If you're working a $15 an hour job, there's no way you can afford that. This will allow some parents to get back into the workforce earlier, so it helps both ways.
Thank you. Hannah Valento.
Excuse me. I couldn't agree more with Nancy and Josiah's answers. I think they summarized it fantastically in that I definitely support this, and that I think it'll help close that achievement gap. It'll help support parents who need to go back to work, and it'll help our young people just get that head start and that first step into the education programs and worlds that they need to succeed in our communities.
Thank you. Next question will go first to Nancy McLean. If elected, what will your top 3 priorities be?
Economy, healthcare, and education. We need an economy that works for all of us, not just for large corporations or for the wealthy. It needs to work for all Minnesotans. We've already talked about education, but we definitely need to focus there. And healthcare, I am passionate about. It's something that cuts across all of the issues. Kids can't perform well at school if they aren't healthy. It goes to the wealth gap, as I talked about earlier. It just cuts across all sectors, even public safety. So those would be my top priorities.
Thank you. Hannah Valento.
My top priorities would be a strong workforce to make sure our workers are being paid fair wages, to make sure that they have paid family leave and more. And the second would be education, as we've all mentioned before, fully funding education. And then the last is sustainable environment, to make sure we're focusing on passing those critical green initiatives within a reasonable timeline for our great state.
Thank you. And Josiah Hill.
My top priority is education and ensuring that all Minnesota children have a world-class education so that they can be who they choose to become. Secondly, I would focus on environmental protection legislation to ensure that we have clean water, air, and soil, and that we're taking the climate crisis head-on by reducing our carbon output here in Minnesota. Thirdly, I would speak to healthcare. High-quality, accessible healthcare that is available to all, and that includes protecting a woman's right to choose.
Thank you. And this next question will be our last one, and it will go first to Hannah Valento. If elected, what will be your top 3 priorities and why? Did we miss you again?
No, is it a different question?
I just asked the same one. Thank you. All right, wake up. This is the last question. What committee assignments will you seek and why?
Oh, this great question. I've been asked this a few times, and for me, it's hard to really pinpoint which one because I have so many different areas, but obviously ones that go towards my top priorities, such as education, the environment, but also my background is legislative work, and so any that deals with legislative procedure would be my favorites. So. But regardless, besides that, just like on city council, I was put on different boards, and I love them all. So it's it's really anywhere that I would be put on. If I didn't even have a say, I would make the most of any that I was put on. So
Thank you. Josiah Hill.
Number one is education policy. I want to serve on that committee to not only serve our children and invest in wise policy to ensure the future of Minnesota, but also to take on some of the fraudulent attacks that continue to be utilized to make a villain out of public education and to weaponize things that have happened in our schools for generations that are not sinister. Secondly, educational funding. We know that the policy and quality policy cannot be enacted without the resources it takes to put them forth. And lastly, environmental protections are key to my heart and to who I am as a person and as a candidate. And so to be able to serve on committees that are addressing environmental policy would be a dream.
Thank you. And Nancy McLean.
Well, as a healthcare provider, healthcare would be my number one request to be put on. But education would also be something that would be very interesting to me and would be a top priority. And environment, because I am such a passionate environmentalist. I would love to be on environmental policy committees as well.
Thank you. So we'll now turn to your closing statements where you can summarize your qualifications and positions, and we'll go in reverse order of the first question, and so we'll start with Josiah Hill.
Very good. Well, I mentioned it a few times. My wife, Emily, and we just celebrated our 20th anniversary, are raising 3 young daughters who are 11, 7, and 6 years old. This election, to me, is about the future, and I believe that future is bright. And as I continue to campaign and seek out your support and your votes, I think the contrast will be clear between what our candidacy stands for in working to achieve a bright future in Minnesota, instead of utilizing fear and division to try to box out for positions today. As we look ahead, we have a unique opportunity with a historic surplus. As we look out ahead, we have opportunities to grow closer and to collaborate and to listen and to be open to receiving others' perspectives. And I really hope, at the end of the day, that we have opportunities here in Minnesota to elect lawmakers across the entire state who are focused on lowering the temperature and serving the great citizens in Minnesota.
Thank you. Hannah Valento.
I have lived in the district my whole life. I grew up in Hugo, and I now live in Forest Lake. I am proud to serve on the Forest Lake City Council, and I'm also on the Forest Lake Rotary Club. And recently this year, I was appointed to the Governor's Workforce Development Board, and which I'm super proud of. And for my full-time job, I'm a licensed attorney for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. And with the Mille Lacs Band, they are a 3-branch government, so I work for their legislative branch, drafting bills bills for their elected officials. And the reason I'm running is because politics has just become so divisive and hostile among the parties. And I know people on both sides and everyone in between, and we can have great discussions. And so I just want to make sure that in the future, we're continuing to strive to have those great discussions, working together to build a community together, learning from one another, and just making it a positive place for everyone to be.
Thank you. Nancy McLean.
Well, every election is a choice, and this year the choice in District 33 couldn't be more clear. We need a Minnesota that works well for everyone, not just corporations and the wealthy. We need a Minnesota not of extremes, but of solutions that benefit families and seniors and small businesses. I'm ready to fight for an economy that works for all of us, for access to affordable, high-quality health care for all Minnesotans, for protecting our environment, for a public education system that provides every student with what they need to succeed, and for a woman's right to make medical decisions, reproductive health care decisions about her own body without political interference. My experience as a small business owner, a healthcare provider, and a corporate professional have given me the skills to navigate these challenges. I'm ready to get to work for our district and for the state. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all for putting yourself forward to be elected. Our website, lwv-wbla.org. At the Candidates Forums page, has listings for all of our forums that we're holding this year for state and local races. And it has links where you can submit questions for those that are still upcoming. You can view a recording of this forum in a day or two on our YouTube channel, League of Women Voters, White Bear Lake area. And you can also look for it on your local cable channel at a time they will arrange. So thank you, and remember to vote on or before November 8th. Early voting starts September 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me come up and just say